Issue 142. We start out with Hope doing research at the Knothole Library for a history report, and finding on the computer information about the original freedom fighters, who I presume all got killed because they didn't have magical powers, like Sonic or Tails. She then loses her notes, and Sonic catches them all for her at the speed of sound, another creative use of his powers. Sonic explains to her during a walk near the Lake of Rings that it was Colonel Stripe who not only planned the escape to Knothole the day Robotnik took over, but also was the one who formed the original freedom fighters who, unless they're going to have distinct personalities, I'm not going to care one bit about. Sonic explains that he was 5 years old specifically when Robotnik overthrew King Acorn. Then a couple panels are wasted because we already know about this whole backstory and it just has these new characters retconned into it. Sonic shows up separated from his friends and is told worried that he has to look for Rosie and tell them to go to Knothole through the secret access way at Old Man Gallagher's house. Oh, like Mike Gallagher, that's swell. It's explained by Sonic that the original freedom fighters knew they couldn't take Robotnik and had to just get as many citizens in Knothole as possible. At the very least, this does explain why so many people got to Knothole so easily knowing where to go, since before this, we only knew how Sonic, Rosie, Sally, and their friends were led to Knothole. Still, most of this story feels like a pointless waste of time reiterating what we already know. We see the original freedom fighters debating over whether they could do something about Robotnik since they don't have the manpower for an army or the resources to win. The Colonel says they'll take resources from Robotnik and form units to stage hit-and-run ops that will hurt as much of Robotnik's infrastructure as possible. And while these guys call themselves the Freedom Fighters, Sonic silently fist bumps a young Sally behind a desk, agreeing that they'll be Freedom Fighters too. It's revealed these guys even rescued Sonic once when he was 7 and got too close to Robotropolis. It's implied that Sonic really looked up to them and they were his inspiration, although this seems unnecessary since Sally playing to form the Freedom Fighters in their base was good enough for me as a motivation for Sonic, and he would have wanted to fight against Robotnik anyways. Who is it that first came up with the idea to call themselves the Freedom Fighters? The original ones? Or Sally? Sally, which would have made more sense because Sonic said, Freedom Fighters, isn't that a little extreme? So obviously he hadn't have heard of the name Freedom Fighters before, but for this story arc it's going to be confusing with the chronology of that. And the story ends with Sonic explaining that what happened to them is that they were betrayed by one of their own. That came out of nowhere, since there was no actual personality established to make it, though there was no personality established for any of the characters, so it's not like it was obvious that they wouldn't betray each other, I guess. In the next story, we see Sally making a speech about when Amy first wanted to become a freedom fighter. Wait a minute, why is Sally saying that Amy used Sonic's billionth ring to become Molder when she didn't? She used the Ring of Acorns from that Indiana Jones place. I knew about her using the Ring of Acorns even before I read up to that issue. I don't know what even happened to the billionth ring. It should have still been mounted on Sonic's wall. Either way, Sally makes a speech about how Amy defeated an army of robots with her hammer in issue 132. Unfortunately, Sally doesn't get mad at her for mentioning that she had help from her hammer, like Amy was worrying would happen. Instead, Sally really shows how far things have come since she responded to Amy asking to help with, "Don't even think about it." Now, she actually respects her and thinks she's matured. It's pretty sweet, this ending, as Sally offers her a medal so that she can finally be a freedom fighter, with Amy being all happy at what happened. I knew this would happen eventually, but shouldn't it have happened a lot sooner if the reason she's accepted from what she did several issues ago? Because of her being released on Army of Robots, I thought she'd already have been accepted as a freedom fighter during the time Sonic was gone. Also, it was sweet of Robin to come here away from his wife and child to see Amy's medal awarding. In the final story, we start out with what took several seconds for me to realize was thought bubbles of other characters' worries going around Knuckles' mind when he's trying to sleep. But because they weren't more clearly in thought bubbles, I thought they were in separate panels or something, explaining stuff to Lee and Duh. In a thought bubble, Kobar reveals that his best guess to the planet's destruction is a year. Well, that's not as threatening. After Lara says to Knuckles that an old friend of his asked if he was training her to be a guardian yet and tries to change his mind again, Rotor is unable to use simulations to provide him with enough data to work out a corrective formula, so he finally gets the idea to just go back in time. And for some reason, Kobar isn't immediately corrected on his arbitrary skepticism by Rotor saying that Robotnik literally made a time machine once. Kobar mentions that time travel is naturally a field of research that Echidna scientists are banned from exploring. as opposed to other scientists, I assume. Also, a huge plot hole, Kobar is in the Dark Legion. He's like Leonida's favorite scientist. So wouldn't the Dark Legion not really want to follow the stupid technology bans? Isn't that the whole reason they had that fight in the first place? If the Dark Legion reconciled with them, well, I just can't buy that they would ever follow the technology ban. So they would be time traveling all the time. Rotor says it's not the echidna scientist he has in mind, and says he's surprised at him. I am too. It should have been obvious that he's capable of doing this. Meanwhile, Sonic once again tells Sally that he's not meant to be a king, and continues till he actually feels overwhelmed, and Sally's the one who should have been in that meeting with Rotor and Kobar, because she's the real power on the throne. Sally says that she's never pulled rank on him, somehow. I don't really buy that, and is told that if they weren't dealing with Knuckles, Rotor would have gone to Sally instead of him. Knuckles then tells him there's a call on the vid phone with a terrible name, and they go see a transmission with Rotor and Kobar in his den. Rotor says that to even make an attempt at saving the world with their method, they'll need the King's authorization, since they require access to Robotnik's tachyon displacement chamber. What's tachyon? Either way, that's a time travel plutonium that would let Rotor send someone back in time to collect the needed data 20 years ago. Rotor's major concern is that whoever goes back might not be able to return, as opposed to the concern that he'd alter the future from the past and possibly wreck their peace later. And that's assuming the device works as advertised. Sounds like the perfect out for Sonic to have an adventure. Sonic says they're allowed to do it, and he and Knuckles will meet them both at the shuttle port in 2 hours. He then tells Knuckles there's no reason Sally and the kid should have to tag along or even know about this. Naturally, since they'd be worried. Meanwhile, after Knuckles says he has some business to take care of, Sonia naturally complains about the bullshit that even though she's the oldest child, her irresponsible brother Manic gets to be king because he's the firstborn male. So, I guess Sally, with her independent streak, didn't think to oppose that law just because the king wanted it. The story ends with Knuckles having his hand on his chin while Lara complains that she'll never get to be a guardian. Is she finally going to get her wish? The first and second stories were by Romy Chacon. Most of the first story seems like a waste of time to me, especially since I don't see any personalities to make me the least bit invested in the original Freedom Fighters. I was just hoping they'd be killed the whole time. But it does actually fill in a plot hole, and that now we know who got so many Mobians to Knothole in the first place. Before this, we only knew how Sonic, Rosie, Sally, Jalila, and Sonic's friends got to Knothole. But the other people finding Knothole was still a mystery, although I assumed that Sally was the one who did it. And it was nice to know the exact age Sonic was when Robotnik took over, I guess. I didn't expect it to be that young. But the only time I cared about this backstory was when Sonic revealed the betrayal. And by that point, the story already ended. And in the second story, I'm just confused that Amy wasn't already accepted as a freedom fighter by this point. If she's being rewarded for fighting an army of robots several issues ago, what took Sally so long? At least it's heartwarming showing how far Sally's come in trusting and respecting her. But I was expecting her to go on like a whole adventure or a whole mission that would earn her place as a freedom fighter, but instead it's just her fighting off one army. Finally, with the third story by Ken Penders, we have Rotor finally come up with the idea of time travel to help save the world, or rather, gather data. Although I have to wonder what his exact plan is, because all three of the events that supposedly caused the start of the apocalypse were very important, significant periods in history that would have major consequences being prevented from happening. If Sonic never went on the cosmic interstate that one time, he wouldn't have met Scourge and given him that huge inferiority complex over not being the only Sonic, and giving him its whole motivation for every evil plan we'll see him do after that point. He wouldn't have helped Robotnik or do any of the things he did later. Okay, that's good actually. I don't really see how that would have prevented the peacetime. But if the second event was stopped, Robotnik would still be around and might have succeeded in destroying every living thing with the Ultimate Annihilator being programmed the way he intended. And for the third event being stopped, the world would have been destroyed by the Zorda. How exactly does Rotor expect to have time travel save the day, when all of these events, or at least two of them, were unavoidable? What data could he possibly have Sonic gather to help them? At least the story was engaging, and ends with the hope that Lyra might be allowed to be a guardian after all. But in retrospect, I don't really see how time travel would solve it if the only events that caused the core problem were the whole unavoidable ones. If that's the case, then time travel wouldn't save the day. He would need a device that would fix the core problem.